In a moment that will be replayed for decades, King Charles delivered a message no one expected and few were prepared to hear. It wasn't a public speech. It was a video, pre-recorded and sealed by palace security. Now, it's been released, and the contents have shaken the very foundations of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The footage was not broadcast in a grand ceremony, nor did it arrive with a press release. It appeared like a ghost uploaded in the early hours to the official royal platform, buried beneath layers of digital protocol, with no fanfare and no accompanying statement. Yet within minutes, it was all anyone could speak of. What viewers saw was unlike any address by a reigning monarch in living memory. King Charles, seated alone, appeared solemn, fragile, and resolute. His voice, steady but marked by weariness, carried the tone of a man not just confronting his own mortality but warning of a storm still forming inside the monarchy. Insiders later confirmed what many suspected. This was no ordinary message. It had been recorded in secret, weeks before, during a period of complete media blackout. Few even knew it existed. The tone was described by senior staff as part farewell, part warning, a haunting mixture of legacy and unfinished business. The king did not mention his health, yet every word dripped with finality. And then, in a move that would ripple across every estate, he spoke a name with unmistakable clarity: Catherine. Never before had the Princess of Wales been named so directly in a royal transition message. Never before had her role been outlined not as support to the heir, but as a pillar of the future itself. Charles didn't just praise her, he entrusted her. He spoke of integrity, of compassion, of vision. And he hinted, with grave sincerity, that her leadership may be more vital than the nation yet realizes. For many, it felt like a silent coronation. For others, a challenge to the line of succession. The recording, palace sources later confirmed, was edited only by the king's personal team, an unprecedented departure from protocol. No political vetting, no communication spin. This was Charles, unfiltered. Those closest to the monarch reported that senior advisors were not even notified before the video went live. One aide described the atmosphere inside the palace as stunned and unprepared, while another simply called it a bombshell buried in velvet. Across social media, clips of the message spread like wildfire. News anchors choked on their words trying to process the implications. Royal commentators scrambled to interpret not only what Charles had said, but what he had left unsaid. Speculation grew instantly. Why now? Why Catherine? And where was William in this narrative? What began as a mysterious video soon revealed itself to be something far more consequential, a final declaration, cloaked in symbolism, that pointed to both fracture and renewal. And while many tried to dismiss it as ceremonial, it became quickly clear that this was the opening note of something seismic. But what could compel a reigning monarch to speak so gravely on camera, and why did his words place Catherine at the center of a brewing storm? For months, rumors swirled. A cancelled appearance here, a frail photo there. But now, sources confirm what the palace refused to acknowledge. King Charles had been concealing a health crisis, one that may have altered the course of royal succession forever. It began quietly, as it always does. Small gaps in the calendar, engagements handed off to other members of the family, whispers among the press corps that something wasn't quite right. At first, the palace dismissed the speculation with vague reassurances, adjusting for rest, routine scheduling, minor fatigue. But those close to the monarch saw a very different story unfold behind closed doors. King Charles was making private visits to medical specialists under heavy security protocols, each trip disguised with decoy routes and shadowed itineraries. These appointments weren't casual checkups, they were intense, highly classified consultations with experts whose names were scrubbed from visitor logs. No one could get close, not even senior staff. The few who did were swiftly made to sign new layers of non-disclosure agreements, updated with language that reportedly hinted at an impending transition in responsibilities. And yet, it wasn't just physical exhaustion. Insiders described a visible change in Charles's demeanor, less public charisma, more inner reflection. At public events, aides began standing closer, ready to intervene. On royal tours, he took fewer steps, delivered shorter speeches, and cut visits short without explanation. There was a growing sense of fragility, as if the very institution itself was being held together by quiet panic. Privately, both Catherine and William were summoned to an emergency briefing at Balmoral, where Charles is said to have addressed them with unprecedented candor. What exactly was discussed remains unknown, but what followed cannot be ignored. Catherine's presence around the king increased dramatically, while William became notably more reserved, even distant. Something had shifted between them, something unsaid but unmistakable. Perhaps the most revealing detail came not from a briefing or a doctor's note, but from the video itself. Palace archivists noticed subtle handwritten revisions to the script, inserted by Charles just days before it was filmed. They weren't stylistic changes, they were loaded with meaning. References to legacy, to unfinished work, and most haunting of all, a phrase many now believe was meant to echo beyond the grave: the crown must serve the people, even when the people don't yet see what's coming. To some it sounded like foresight. To others, it sounded like goodbye. Several staff members who had served through previous royal crises later admitted they believed the message to be, in spirit if not in form, the king's living will. And with that context, the message took on an entirely different weight. This wasn't a routine address. This was a man confronting time, fate, and fragility, and choosing to act before others would. Because Charles didn't just want to leave a message, he wanted to leave clarity. And so, with history watching and legacy looming, he made a choice that sent ripples through every corridor of power. But as the world reeled from the video's emotional weight, what came next made it political, because Charles didn't name William as the future's anchor, he named Catherine. In a move that defied centuries of tradition, King Charles chose to elevate a woman not born royal to a position no one saw coming. Catherine's new role isn't ceremonial, it's command. And the implications are staggering. The moment Charles uttered her name with such reverence in his final message, there was a palpable shift in the air, one that could be felt across every institution tied to the monarchy. But it wasn't just the mention that stunned Britain, it was what followed. The soul of the monarchy's future, he called her. Not a consort, not a companion. A cornerstone, a title that broke from custom, from lineage, and from the expectations of a system rooted in bloodlines and titles. It was clear, this was not a blessing. It was a baton. And the hand that now held it was not William's, but Catherine's. Almost immediately, palace sources confirmed whispers that had begun to emerge in the weeks leading up to the video's release. Catherine had been granted executive oversight over multiple royal trusts, including those traditionally managed by the reigning monarch or heir. It wasn't a courtesy. It was authority. Overnight, she became a decision-maker on matters of finance, patronage, and constitutional engagement. Behind the gates of Kensington and Windsor, staff scrambled to understand what this shift meant in practice. And while many assumed this would be a temporary arrangement, others uncovered something far more permanent in the works. Internal discussions were already underway to formalize her role as Crown Counselor, a newly revived position that would place her in direct succession for all royal decision-making during transitional periods. Not support, not standby, active governance. Even among seasoned royal aides, the shock was unmistakable. Some admitted they had never seen a strategic move unfold so quickly, or so quietly. Most were unaware that this was coming, including reportedly William himself. Sources suggest he had been informed of changes in structure, but not the full scope of Catherine's elevation. The revelation landed like a blow, not because he opposed her, but because the king had made this decision without consultation, bypassing the very protocol William had grown up obeying. Camilla, meanwhile, was described by insiders as betrayed and blindsided. Her name never appeared in the message. No acknowledgement, no instruction, no role. After decades spent climbing toward recognition, she had been reduced to silence in the space of a single sentence. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was institutional. Constitutional advisors, some of whom had worked under 3 monarchs, began convening emergency sessions to assess the legal and symbolic weight of Charles's directive. No precedent existed for such a move. Catherine's rise wasn't just surprising, it was historic. Because if the monarchy is a machine of tradition, then this appointment was the sound of that machine being torn apart and rebuilt in real time. A monarchy forged through centuries of blood and conflict had just been recalibrated by the stroke of a single voice, and the quiet composure of the woman chosen to lead it. And while Catherine tried to maintain calm, palace walls began to whisper, because this wasn't a promotion. It was a power shift. She stood by Charles through scandal and shame, only to be cast aside in his final act. Camilla's status crumbled overnight, and behind her composure lies fury, fear, and a fight for relevance. When the final video message was released, Camilla was not among those briefed in advance. While senior members of the royal household received encrypted links and secured transcripts, Camilla was conspicuously left out. Sources close to her say she first heard the contents not from a palace aide but from a journalist. By the time her team had gained access to the full message, it was already dominating headlines. And then came the brutal realization: not once in the king's carefully prepared address did he mention her name. No nod to her decades of loyalty. No formal mention of her title. Not even a symbolic gesture of gratitude. In a monarchy built on legacy and image, erasure is its most damning punishment. What followed was a quiet dismantling of Camilla's royal presence. Internally, discussions began around the legal reclassification of her status. With Charles's surprise delegation of constitutional oversight to Catherine, questions swirled around whether the queen consort title still held weight or had been made effectively obsolete. The whispers turned into action. Multiple public engagements listed under Camilla's calendar were suddenly pulled, with no explanation. Event organizers were told to redirect inquiries to Kensington. The optics were unmistakable. Her reign as consort was not ending with ceremony, but with silence. Behind the scenes, the cracks widened into confrontation. Camilla's long-standing tensions with the palace communications team erupted into a storm of accusations. She allegedly accused the PR office of failing to protect her legacy, of allowing Charles's message to go out unchallenged. Tempers flared in back corridors. Memos were leaked. And then, perhaps most shocking of all, came whispers that Camilla had considered a televised interview a move that would shatter royal protocol and send shockwaves through the already reeling institution. Allies close to her urged restraint, warning that public defiance could accelerate her isolation. But Camilla, once invisible in Charles's shadow, was not used to being forgotten. Amid the chaos, a chorus of former advisors to Charles quietly stepped forward, not in support, but in counsel. They urged Camilla to step down with dignity, to preserve what legacy she had built by walking away before the institution formally pushed her out. For a woman who had fought for decades to win the crown she now wore, the thought of surrender was unthinkable. And yet, her options were vanishing as quickly as her influence. Without Charles's voice to reinforce her place, she stood alone in a palace she once helped shape. A queen consort in title, but no longer in power. And while the public debated the fairness of her fall, the palace turned its attention elsewhere. Because with Camilla destabilized and the monarchy in free fall, one figure, unyielding, unwavering, was stepping into the void. But the monarchy's internal crisis was only just beginning, and its most unshakable figure was about to emerge from the shadows. While others scrambled, Princess Anne did what she always had acted. But this time, her actions weren't supportive, they were strategic. And with Charles's blessing sealed in video, Anne took steps that would redefine royal command. In the wake of the video's release, as confusion gripped the palace and headlines spiraled out of control, Anne remained steady. She wasn't blindsided. She wasn't shocked. Because unlike others, she had been prepared. Charles had trusted her with a letter hand delivered weeks before the filming of his message, granting her stewardship powers should the monarchy enter a transitional phase. Those words, simple in appearance, carried a mountain of weight. And Anne, pragmatic as ever, wasted no time. Within 24 hours of the broadcast, she summoned the senior estate managers, not to discuss what had happened, but to instruct them on what would happen next. Her authority wasn't questioned. It was accepted. Quietly. Immediately. The monarchy had always had one figure of stability, and now she was stepping into that role with precision. She took control of palace security restructuring, ordering discreet transfers of internal personnel, reassigning teams whose loyalties had grown too entangled with Camilla's orbit. Every action was subtle, but deliberate. In doing so, she re-established the perimeter of royal influence: who could speak, who could move, and more importantly, who couldn't. One of her earliest moves, carried out without public knowledge, was to restrict Camilla's access to the royal post-release archives. Anne understood the danger of desperation, and with Camilla's status unraveling, she took no chances. Quietly, but effectively, she closed every door that could be weaponized. But Anne's role wasn't just enforcement. It was guidance. She personally briefed Catherine in a meeting that, according to palace sources, lasted nearly 3 hours. The tone was not ceremonial, it was tactical. Anne laid out what Charles had envisioned, what responsibilities Catherine now inherited, and how to navigate the storm to come. She didn't speak in hypotheticals. She spoke in deadlines, contingencies, consequences. It wasn't mentorship. It was succession preparation. And Catherine listened, absorbing not just instructions, but the full weight of what Charles had placed on her shoulders. Inside royal circles, Anne became known as the Iron Stabilizer, not out of affection, but out of necessity. When monarchies stumble, it's not the crown that saves them, it's the spine. And Anne had become that spine. She wasn't there for applause. She wasn't looking for power. She was preserving the only thing she had ever sworn to protect, the institution itself. In doing so, she stepped into the shadows, not to retreat, but to hold everything else upright. Because while Catherine had been chosen to lead, Anne was the one ensuring the palace didn't collapse before she had the chance. But even as Catherine gained power, she was forced to face the one challenge Charles had tried to protect her from: William. The nation expected to see William crowned with responsibility. Instead, they saw him mentioned once, briefly, without title or directive. His silence since the video has been deafening, and it may not be noble. For a man born to inherit the throne, the omission felt seismic. As the country sat glued to King Charles's final message, waiting for confirmation of the heir's role in the next chapter of the monarchy, what they received instead was a single line, curt, non-committal, and curiously void of praise. William was referenced, but not empowered. Not instructed. Not framed as the pillar of the future. In a monarchy where every word carries centuries of weight, the absence of recognition was more revealing than any declaration could have been. And William's response? Nothing. Not a press appearance. Not a formal statement. Not even a coordinated photo op. Silence. And behind it, a storm the palace couldn't contain. Insiders revealed that William had declined to attend the private debrief held at Windsor following the video's release. His absence was glaring. Staff had set a seat for him, anticipating a unifying gesture, a shared front. But the chair remained empty. According to multiple sources, he had received the briefing documents but refused to comment on them. This wasn't disinterest, it was resistance. And within the walls of Kensington, tension crackled between him and Catherine. On the surface, their appearances were intact smiles, waves, the practiced choreography of royalty. But those closest to them described a coldness, a space widening behind closed doors. One aide called it a battle of purpose. Catherine, stepping into authority. William, watching it happen without invitation. For years, their differences had been carefully managed. William, more guarded, favored privacy and tradition. Catherine, more intuitive with the public pulse, leaned into modernizing the crown's image. Their alignment, once considered their greatest strength, had become their quiet divide. And it didn't help that speculation surged around Charles's motivations. Some whispered that the king had long feared William wasn't ready, that the pressure had exposed fault lines in his temperament, that his internal reluctance to lead publicly, to bear the full glare of the monarchy, had forced Charles to look elsewhere. Others claimed Charles had grown weary of waiting, tired of William's hesitations and inconsistencies. But no matter the reason, one truth became unavoidable. William was no longer at the center of the crown's future plan. Media outlets erupted with theories. Headlines questioned his absence, his silence, his relevancy. The refusal of his office to offer even a boilerplate statement only fueled the fire. And within palace circles, whispers emerged that William had taken the omission as a personal betrayal. Not because he craved power, but because his father had made a decision of legacy without him. Sources say he felt sidelined, humiliated, and most painfully, mistrusted. And yet, he said nothing. Not because he was unaffected, but because he was waiting. Waiting for what came next. waiting for his moment to respond not through words but through presence or absence, support or resistance. But no royal reckoning is complete without a confrontation, and Catherine's next move would force it into the light. No cameras, no press, just one woman and a table full of men who had advised monarchs for generations. Catherine walked into the Crown Office alone and walked out with more power than any Princess of Wales in history. It wasn't announced. It wasn't even listed on the internal royal calendar. The meeting was summoned under a confidential protocol reserved for rare constitutional shifts moments when the monarchy faces internal disruption so significant it must redraw the map of its own structure. Held deep within Windsor's private wing, the Crown Office gathered its most senior advisors, archivists, and legal custodians. At the center of that circle stood Catherine, no escort, no William, no Anne. Only her. The silence in the room was not ceremonial, it was strategic. This was not a formality. It was a pivot point. Before her lay a sealed dossier marked Sovereign Delegation Immediate. Inside, a stack of transition documents, each bearing the unmistakable signature of King Charles. Some dated weeks earlier. Some altered just days before the video was released. These weren't letters of intent. They were royal orders binding and urgent. The documents outlined the formation of a new constitutional advisory body, one that would operate under Catherine's oversight during an undefined interregnum. She wasn't being asked to participate. She was being required to approve. The wording was clear. Authority, not consultation. The monarchy, in its most fragile hour, was asking Catherine to lead not symbolically, but operationally. What followed was a quiet but seismic shift. Palace archivists were instructed to prepare amendments to the line of succession protocols, not to change the order, but to clarify contingency governance in the absence of an active sovereign. The phrase sent shockwaves through the Crown's inner circle. It had never been used publicly. It had rarely been uttered privately. And now, it was being printed on official documents. Catherine, who once stood in the soft light of tradition, was now navigating the harsh weight of transformation. She wasn't simply holding the fort, she was re-engineering it from within. One advisor, present in the room, would later describe the meeting as the moment the Crown pivoted. Not toward scandal, not toward spectacle, but toward survival. And it was Catherine, unprepared, unelected, unelevated, who was entrusted to carry the institution across the chasm left in Charles's wake. Every paper signed, every approval granted, further separated her from the role she once played and solidified the role she had now assumed. It wasn't power seized. It was power handed down, as if the monarchy itself had recognized that legacy alone would not be enough. Not this time. As the meeting ended and the final document was secured, there was no applause, no moment of recognition, just a room emptied of sound, and a future silently set into motion. Catherine walked out with more than documents. She walked out as the only figure now capable of stabilizing the institution. And yet, despite every answer she had just been given, one mystery remained, hanging heavy over everything. But as the monarchy recalibrated around Catherine, the final question remained: where had Charles gone, and why was his message marked final? The video was released, the duties reassigned. But the king himself? Gone. No public appearance. No confirmation of condition. Just an absence that feels louder than any announcement. It began as a pause easily dismissed. A few hours without comment. A missed engagement. But as the hours stretched into days, and days crept past the moment the video shook the world, something deeper began to settle in the air. Dread. Charles's last confirmed sighting was a brief encounter with estate staff at Balmoral, just 2 days before the palace released the video. Since then, nothing. No photo ops. No waving from car windows. No handwritten notes to the public. The man who had just reshaped the monarchy's entire internal structure vanished into complete silence. When questioned, palace officials offered only a single sentence: "There are no updates at this time." It was cold, calculated, and, to those who knew how to read between the lines, deeply troubling. Helicopter activity at Sandringham raised alarms. Aircraft logged in the early hours, taking off and landing under complete blackout conditions. Rumors spiraled, some claiming the king had been transferred to a private medical wing, others suggesting an undisclosed family location was housing him in total seclusion. The truth remained locked behind stone walls, but the vacuum of information made one thing clear. Something was being concealed. Behind the scenes, palace aides began to prepare for contingencies. Catherine, already thrust into executive oversight, was allegedly asked to begin drafting a second public statement. This one more personal, more grounded. It was to acknowledge the growing concern without admitting crisis. But before it could be recorded, whispers emerged from Fleet Street that an obituary had already been prepared. Not composed in a hurry. Not drafted overnight. Circulated. Polished. Ready. Reporters were told to stand by. Broadcasting channels subtly adjusted their programming lineups. The nation wasn't just watching, they were bracing. Inside the monarchy, questions turned inward. Why had Charles filmed the video weeks before? Why were his instructions so meticulously timed? Was this all anticipated? Or was it a final act of control from a king who saw the storm before anyone else? Those closest to the royal pulse claimed Charles had expressed fears of becoming a symbol in decline. He didn't want to be remembered as the monarch who faded away. He wanted to pass power, not lose it. And now, with his whereabouts a mystery, and his silence resounding across the globe, that final wish may have already been fulfilled. No statement could calm the mounting unease. No press release could undo the sense of absence. This was more than a missing king. It was the sound of a nation holding its breath, waiting to exhale. A vacuum not just of presence, but of legacy. And as Britain waits in breathless silence, Catherine prepares to step into a role the world never imagined for her. She was never meant to lead. But now, Catherine's first public directive has been issued, and it doesn't just signal her leadership. It reveals a new kind of monarchy, one built not on lineage but on legacy. The silence that followed Charles's disappearance was finally pierced not by William, not by palace advisors, but by the Princess of Wales herself. Catherine stepped forward with a clarity and command that caught even seasoned royal observers off guard. There were no pleasantries, no ceremonial fluff, just a firm voice, a deliberate pause, and a vision that seemed to both honor the past and shatter its limits. Her announcement came under the banner of the Royal Restoration Initiative, and its contents were nothing short of revolutionary. Gone were the vague commitments and ribbon-cutting appearances of old. In their place, Catherine unveiled a sweeping realignment of royal funds, prioritizing youth opportunity programs, comprehensive mental health support systems, and direct resources for veterans transitioning to civilian life. It wasn't just philanthropic, it was structural, strategic, symbolic of a monarchy that didn't just want to be seen, but wanted to serve. Even more striking was the internal reshuffling. Catherine, still officially the Princess of Wales, quietly assumed responsibilities her father-in-law once held: close weekly policy briefings, national planning meetings, and private consultations with senior government liaisons. Royal insiders confirmed what many suspected. Catherine wasn't filling in. She was stepping up. Behind the scenes, Princess Anne, ever the anchor in crisis, was appointed as royal executor, charged with ensuring continuity until formal succession could be confirmed. But even Anne's presence, while essential, was overshadowed by the rising certainty around Catherine's new stature. The British public responded with fervor. Polling numbers surged. Headlines shifted from speculation to celebration. Across generations, a singular phrase began to surface with growing frequency, spoken in reverence, in astonishment, and in reluctant admiration from even the monarchy's harshest critics: Queen-in-Waiting. It was a phrase no one dared utter months ago. Yet now, it felt inevitable. Not because of bloodline or tradition, but because of clarity, purpose, and strength shown when the crown trembled. Catherine's emergence as a stabilizing force wasn't orchestrated, it was earned. Through patience, through resilience, through years of quiet preparation no one outside the palace ever truly noticed. Until now. As her initiatives launched, as her voice echoed across airwaves once reserved for kings, a line was drawn in royal history, marking the end of one era and the unapologetic beginning of another. Because while Charles left behind a message, Catherine now carries its meaning, and Britain will never view the monarchy the same way again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.